Wait for it. I love that video. Hi, everyone. I'm going to give you some information about sibling rivalry. And as you can see, it's going to be in the form of 3 big things, 6 mistakes, 2 steps, 2 minutes, 4 challenges, and 1 bottom line. Let's start with the 3 big things. Number 1, sibling relationships set the stage for future emotionally intimate and healthy relationships. One of the biggest advantages to having a sibling is the opportunity to get lots of practice negotiating conflict, resolution, repair, and forgiveness. These are essential skills that they'll need to build healthy relationships. Number 2, we, as in parents, must help siblings manage their relationships and conflicts. You'll hear more about that later, but it is definitely one of the 3 big things, meaning we need to stay close by and coach our kids through these conflicts. Number 3, siblings need to feel unique and equally loved by you, because when they don't is when we see sibling rivalry and sibling conflicts on the rise. So making sure each of your children understands that they're unique and knows what you love about them will help them feel more secure in their place in your family. Here are 6 common mistakes that can lead to. Here are 2 steps, just kind of quick things to remember, maybe when you're in the moment in particular, but just think 2 steps. Number 1, accept conflict when it arrives. It doesn't mean like I'm accepting this and I'm going to blow it off. It's just accepting it, knowing that it is inevitable. And so hopefully you'll see conflict and the sibling conflict as, yep, this is something that happens in all families. And more importantly, will help you stay a little bit calmer and not overreact to the conflict. And then number 2, get curious. We've talked about this before with challenging behavior. Just stop for a second and think, what is really going on here? What is beneath the surface of this? It's easy to judge conflicts from above the surface, but digging a little deeper is really going to help us, first of all, calm down. And then when we're taking that moment to think, that is also giving the whole scene a little bit of a pause. So a couple of things here about old system versus new system. That old system that I definitely grew up with is that children are left to work it out. You guys just figure it out. And number 1, what happens with that is they're going to use their limited or just completely lacking of skills and resort to physical force or verbal meanness. And then what happens there is everybody gets mad, we get mad, and we suddenly step in, and what we do then is punish. Everybody get out of here, go to your rooms, break it up. Everybody ends up crying and frustrated and in separate corners, and no one has really learned a thing. So the new system is we're going to guide our children through the conflict, through that inevitable conflict. So we're going to help them stop it from escalating, means we need to be nearby so we know when it's escalating. And you can say something like, wow, I hear a lot of yelling, or, well, let's everybody take a time out here and see what's going on. And asking number 2, can you tell me what's going on without judgment? Getting both sides of the story or all sides of the story when you can. And then which then leads to helping them get to the root of the conflict so that everybody is feeling heard. A 2-minute action plan. I love this, calling it the fairy tale fantasy, because it really is. But if you drop that fantasy that all of your kids are going to be, each other's best friends and they're always going to get along, but just reminding yourself that it's normal for siblings to fight. And then switching the frame to, there is an opportunity here to for them to grow and learn, and to really learn how to negotiate tension with someone they love. The second step of that action plan is, again, just listening up. right? Giving them a chance to tell their story, not interrupting. I mean, really just not talking sometimes can be just a really good strategy when there's tension between your kids. Listening is a great strategy. Making sure that they feel totally heard before you take action. In an ongoing way, thinking in terms of overall, couple of things here that I think are kind of cool. Replacing fair with kind. I know you've heard that, you know that most kids get to an age or a stage where that's not fair, and what they mean is even Steven. So making sure that you're teaching your kids that fair doesn't mean equal, and that instead using kind. So ask them to think about what would be the kind way to handle this situation. Getting them to think with kindness is going to lead to much more creative solutions and better feelings, quite frankly. Tuning into their fights, listening to their arguments, see if there's any patterns that emerge, and then pointing those out. Hey, I see you guys fight over this truck every day or multiple times a day. What can we do about this? Kids don't really see those patterns. That can be something that we can do to help them. And then from an overall strategy or an overall way of thinking or framing their relationship, try thinking of them as not I'm raising siblings, but I'm raising friends. And reframing it in that way, I think, can take a lot of the emotion out of it, a lot of the extra emotion out of it, so that we help them just support their interactions and play and arguing, to be honest. I'm going to talk about 4 challenges. I think you'll relate to almost all of them if you have more than one child at home or you grew up with siblings. But here's 4 of them with some suggestions on how to handle them. Number 1, your kids are defensive and blame others. So you hear a crash in the other room, you go running in, and you say, "What's going on in here?" And they immediately start pointing their fingers at the other child. He did it. I didn't have anything to do with it. I didn't do it. Sometimes that reaction is partly our fault, because when we do go running into a room and over and over again and saying things like, "What's going on in here? Who did it?" They're gonna do whatever they can to not get in trouble. And if that means, blaming the other person or being defensive about it, that sometimes is they're reacting to sort of a pattern that we have created. So to change that pattern, try just showing empathy for both sides. I know it sounds maybe a little crazy to show empathy to perhaps the child who broke the vase, but validating their feelings and acknowledging that, wow, you must be feeling kind of nervous right now, or you feel a little bit guilty, can go a long way for both the kids to hear that. And then focusing on their relationship, not on the wrongdoing. In the end, it matters more how we're gonna cope with this situation right now, not on figuring out whose fault it was. Another great tool or strategy is just to describe without emotions, kind of in a commentating way, what happened, what do you see, versus what's going on in here, who did this. Just what do you see going on when you enter the situation, can defuse the situation a lot. Number 2, your kids don't share. Very classic. Young kids don't share. Maybe they don't want to share, or they don't know how to share. A lot of times the word share is kind of a dirty word for kids, because what they have learned is when you say you need to share, it means you need to give up this toy or this item. So a tip here is, and some advice is, to not force them to share. Making them share can create a lot of resentment. Focus instead on turn taking, which is a skill and it is a problem-solving strategy. So when you talk about it in terms of turn taking, it means you're each going to have a turn and I'm going to facilitate this. Maybe we're going to set a timer to make sure that instead of share means I have to give this up, turn taking means I am going to have a chance to play with this. And over time, they'll learn to trust that. And then just practically speaking, avoiding non-shareable items to begin with. I think sometimes if there's only one red popsicle and everybody wants it, maybe we don't have popsicles. um, just on a practical level to try to eliminate some of or prevent some of the sibling conflicts. Number three, it's ugly, but it happens where your kids hurt each other. It was definitely something that happened in my family of origin, and with my kids, and it really is a hard thing to see your kids hurt each other physically when you really wanted to see your kids be their best friends. So to again keep in mind that what we can be doing in teaching and noticing in this moment is that the place where they're coming from when they're resorting to pounding on their sibling is they're angry. And so focusing on the anger and how to manage it, manage their emotions, teaching impulse control. What are some other things you can do when you're angry? Also just having it be back to the rules that it is a rule in our house that we do not hit, we use our words, but giving them some strategies of handling that anger, of expressing themselves in a way that doesn't involve physically harming the siblings, and then monitoring them carefully. So especially if you have a child who's maybe going through a phase of a lot of hitting or biting, or is kind of sticking close to them, it helps prevent the behavior, and it also kind of keeps their reputation intact. Nobody wants to be the biter or the mean one in the family, but sticking close by so that you can intervene when it comes up. And again, giving alternatives. So what are some things you can do when you're angry? Coming and getting a parent for help. What can you do rather than resorting to physical violence? Number 4, one child excludes the other. It's also very painful and can just seem cruel, very cruel in some ways, because it usually it seems cruel because kids don't have good skills on how to define or say what they want. So first of all, encouraging empathy, the understanding of I see you want to play with your brother, and then to the other child, I see that you really want to have some time alone, can help them both see both sides. Acknowledging the right to personal space. I am guessing that personal space during this coronavirus lockdown is definitely something that everybody wants and needs. So it is okay to acknowledge that you want to play by yourself right now, and that's okay. A way to help through that situation is to give them a better way to say the same thing. So instead of "get out of here, leave me alone," to give kids ways to say it in a more kind way. I want to play by myself right now, and as soon as I'm done with this, I'll come and play with you, which is the same thing as forecasting a time when they can play together. I'm going to do this right now, and then later this afternoon we'll play together. Can really diffuse a lot of the conflict. So the bottom line, and definitely I'm sure what you've been hearing throughout this presentation, maybe the hardest part for us is that we need to be involved. We really can't just let them figure it out on their own if we want good results and good skills to be built. So we need to get involved so that we can teach and guide our kids. And while in the short term, it is quite an investment of our time and our presence and our energy, in the long term, it really pays off, because you're going to have kids who are going to learn how to resolve conflicts, and they'll take that with them their whole life. And really, it's something that you can consider, in my opinion, a gift that you're going to give your kids, is by really taking advantage of those sibling relationships to learn really great skills that they'll take with them their whole lives. I hope that was helpful. And I hope we can talk about this at our next video chat. If you have any questions, you can always send me an email. Thank you. That can lead to sibling conflict and rivalry. Number one is pushing children towards acceptance, sort of pushing them to love their brother or sister, especially when that new baby comes along. It isn't always going to happen that way. It isn't necessarily natural for kids to immediately fall in love with that new baby. There can be a lot of feelings of stress and anxiety around it. So keep that in mind. Number two, taking sides during an argument is definitely a mistake. I know it's hard to do, especially when it seems obvious who was the button pusher in an argument or a conflict, but it really isn't helpful. It can create, more of that sibling rivalry or competition if you're taking sides. So think about keeping yourself out of the sort of the blame part of it and work more on the relationship part of it. Number three, when households lack structure, meaning if there aren't clear rules and expectations, that is a ripe environment for conflict in general, and lack of security, which can also lead to that more sibling conflict and sibling rivalry. Just making sure that your expectations are clear, having consistent responses to different behaviors and consequences to breaking the rules is really going to help cut down on some of that conflict. Number four, marriage problems. When kids come along, marriage problems are almost inevitable. It really can be a stress on a couple relationship. We're going to talk about that in our next lesson, which is on co-parenting next week. But in the meantime, just know that it is really common for marriage problems to have an effect on the behavior of kids in a family. And when there's tension, that is sometimes kids will act out in aggressive or unhealthy ways. So it is really important to make the marriage relationship, the couple relationship, a priority, because it's good for kids when you do that. Number five, neglect. We're not talking about legally neglecting kids, but just and definitely it's something that we do that we're not doing knowingly, but it does happen at times. And if there is a child who's feeling neglected, they often will do, as whatever they can to get attention. And that can sometimes include, hurting their sibling to all of a sudden everybody's eyes are on that child who just hit their little sister. So keep that in mind. And then number six, comparing children, kind of a classic mistake. But again, it's hard not to sometimes if you do have one child who seems to be the easier, quote unquote, kid, the rule follower. But when you compare kids, it does create an atmosphere where inevitably it creates competition between siblings and therefore sibling conflict. It can be hard for the child who isn't the one who's causing the problems too, because they get held up as the example and nobody wants to be the perfect child all the time. So keep that in mind. Both kids in that situation can have a negative experience from that.